Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. It looks like we have a nice, intimate crowd. So if folks would like to come forward, not forcing you, this is a safe space. Um, Please feel free to come forward a little bit so you can hear us. I know there's commotion from some of the other venues around. And if folks are in the back, I have been asked to inform you all that the headsets on your chairs are meant to amplify the sound. So if you do have trouble hearing us straight from the mics, feel free to use your headphones as well. I wanted to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Radha Mistry. I lead Foresight for the Americas region for global design and engineering firm Arup. And I am thrilled to be joined by our brilliant panelists this afternoon. And I'm going to ask them to actually share just a little bit about their backgrounds, maybe a quick minute per panelists. But I'll start with Nashin Mahtani.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nashin. I'm from Indonesia. I lead a nonprofit called Disaster Map Foundation, where we're building open source tools for climate adaptation.
Dr. Fu.
Hi, I'm Zhiyong Fu from Tsinghua University, Beijing, China. So my background is in industrial design, and I teach interaction design, service design, design innovation in the university. So I think 8 years ago, I just started the design thinking like research, and also co-build Global Design Future Network with my friends in Carnegie Mellon University and the Polytech de Milano.
Wonderful. And Samantha Culp.
Hi, I'm Samantha Culp. I'm a writer and filmmaker based in Los Angeles. I'm working on a book about the history of futurist thinking and its many global landscapes, historically and today, and especially looking at the era of climate crisis as a kind of existential crisis for the future as a whole. So that's, yes.
Thank you so much. So we'll have a little bit of a discussion, and then I'll open it up for some Q&A at the end. But I wanted to spend just a brief moment to kind of contextualize this discussion today. So the idea for this session really began with an experience that Sam and I shared. We both are based in Los Angeles, and the city was recently ravaged by very intense and disastrous wildfires. And much of our local community, I would say, is still navigating the kind of aftermath of that event. And in doing so, we're having to interrogate some very real questions about what it means to build better next time. However, I realize that this experience is unfortunately not exclusive to California. And as we continue to be affected by the impacts of climate change globally, and I'll add that because our cities are inherited, it becomes important to be designers, makers, practitioners who are both locally responsive and yet globally engaged. And so our panelists today are really helping to kind of contextualize this within a wider global discourse, and to kind of help us look beyond our own little corner of the world and learn from and collaborate with our peers to address what I think may be one of our most critical kind of systems design challenges of today. And so with that, I wanted to jump in, and Nashin, I'm gonna kind of start with you a little bit. So in some of our earlier conversations in preparation for this session, you brought up something that I thought was really beautifully put. You said, if the 20th century was about building infrastructures to control uncertainty, the 21st must be about building infrastructures that can respond within uncertainty. And so I wanted to start there and maybe kind of zoom out a little bit more broadly speaking. So in the face of uncertainties like shifting weather patterns, housing crises, demographic changes, which I realize are kind of massive in scale, what from your perspective makes for a resilient community today? And then maybe what are some factors that we're overlooking?
Yeah, I think to address that question, I'd like to ground it as well as where the statement came from. I'm from Jakarta, which is not only one of the most rapidly sinking cities in the world, but also one of the most rapidly urbanizing. There are 30 million people situated on the coastal edge of the world's most disaster-prone region, and that represents the future condition that we should think about as well. And when we think about that condition, it's also not about just thinking of the emergency as a moment of a present, but understanding that that context has a long history that has its origins back in racial and colonial capitalism. And that's where these ideas about control emerge. And so Jakarta has a long history of flooding. It's always flooded, but when it was colonized by the Dutch, the approach was first, let's build a city on a floodplain, and then let's build concrete infrastructures to control and tame all the rivers. And yet, despite 500 years worth of pouring concrete to control these the rivers that are untamed, we continue to experience flooding annually. And it's not just in Jakarta, it's globally as well. Most of the major flood disasters have been a result of infrastructure failure. And so this is the uncertainty that we need to design for. It's when these infrastructures are breaking suddenly, that's what's causing the scale of disasters that we're experiencing. And so when these infrastructures are failing, communities find ways to improvise. And I think that's where resilience comes in. Particularly in our context, even though flooding is becoming increasingly unpredictable, people have been using social media as a means to communicate with each other, to alert to each other where it's flooding, which roads are blocked, community efforts for evacuation. And so our work started from this premise, recognizing that this actually represents an extremely rich sensory apparatus that is distributed around the city, but that gets drowned out in the noise of social media. And the billions of dollars of advertising and schemes that are designed, again, to rob our attention away from the living worlds that we're situated and part of. And so our question was, could we redirect that digital attention back to the environments and life worlds that we are part of? And so in 2017, we built an open source software that automatically plugs into existing social media channels, detects keywords like flood or fire or earthquake, and when our software detects that keyword, a bot will automatically respond to those users saying, hey, are you really in a disaster? And if the user is, it'll invite them to confirm their situation. And those responses are used to map disasters in real time on a free, publicly available website, which is now being used by over 200 million people in Indonesia and the Philippines, as well as by the national government. And essentially what it is, it's redirecting that attention back into the life worlds that we are part of at the scale of a region, using the billions of network smartphones that we have. And to me, it's through these shared practices of relation rather than prediction that will determine how we survive the future together. And that's how we hold uncertainty. It's through learning to pay attention to each other in relation.
Wonderful. So, Dr. Fu, I want to shift just for a moment because your focus is more on the technological and kind of algorithmic infrastructure that we interface with in the city. And, some could argue these are the more invisible systems that very much affect our ability to either thrive or just kind of survive in the context of the city. And in previous discussion, you shared that a resilient community today is not just one that recovers, it is one that learns to negotiate power with machines. It recognizes algorithmic systems as social actors. So I'd love to know kind of how might our relationship with these technologies either inhibit or amplify community resilience? And if you can maybe share an example of what this looks like.
So I think 5 years ago, I wrote a book which named Smart City and Artificial Intelligence with my friends Christopher Kerwin. So our idea is to look at the city as a convergent system. That means the people, the infrastructure, and maybe the algorithm behind the operation system is also connected together. So we cannot solve the city challenge just based in one perspective. So just give you one example because I more interested in how technology can affect our urban life. So China is the best place to test the new technology. So there are many those internet company in China which build the platform. So food delivery rider, the number is huge. It's like 30 million in China. So this delivery system gave us more convenient. So for example, if you order a coffee and 30 minutes, we narrow your bin, so they will give you into your hand. So this brings the convenience for our customer, and the platform also earn the money. But there are so many riders just trapped in this algorithm. So there are many those research in this area. Like one report is during the 2 week, 2023 in Shanghai, there are 20,000 just traffic issues related with those riders. So just like one rider said, he during the 2 years he has 1,000 times to run red light. So when I drive in the road, so I need to take care not only about other car, but those electric delivery riders. So it's also bring another like a social issue for our urban life. So this gave our research some challenges. We need to rethink about from different perspective, not just from technology part, but we also need to think about how to take care the riders, and this system, this algorithm should be negotiated. Like government found this problem, and they launched like a campaign. So they need to make this system more care about those riders. And there are a lot of media report, social media, just give some tell the story about how the riders, they work so hard. So I think this gave us the idea to build a resilient city. So because currently we cannot live without the algorithm, because currently the artificial intelligence, those data technology already play a very important role in our life. So, but we need balance this people's lifestyle with the algorithm. So this system must be negotiated and fit people's need. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So Sam, kind of in this same vein, you are an LA native. You mentioned you're also working on a book exploring the landscape of future studies. So, you know, historically, Southern California is a place that burns, right? For those of us who have kind of grown up there. What was different about the 2025 fires, and maybe why is it important to pay attention to this event as a signal or a case study of this kind of era of climate risk?
Yeah, well, I would say, yeah. So number one, for people maybe who are not as familiar with California, it is a fire ecology. The landscape is made to burn. And historically, and of course for millennia, the indigenous communities who live there, the original inhabitants, the Tongva, Chumash, Gabrielino, and other nations, they used practices similar to many peoples around the world, which is controlled burn, right? So if you have a fire cycle that is happening, there's fire season, but every so often you're doing this kind of controlled burn to burn the chaparral and some of the smaller debris, use up that fuel, then when the big fire comes, it won't be as devastating. Of course, so this is quite similar in a way to some of what Nashin was describing, in the era of Anglo settling the region and driving out the native people, genociding the native people. We have, starting in the 1920s, especially in Southern California, Los Angeles becomes a boom town. It becomes a huge center of investment and activity and business. And so you have the beginning of the official policy of total fire suppression becomes the policy, which even as early as the 20s, fire scientists and firefighters know this is not workable. But it begins to be this essential tension between the interests of private capital and the actual natural landscape, like how the world is. So this I think related to some of the stuff that Radha, we talk about a lot, which is our cities are inherited, right? And our communities are inherited. There's all of these choices and decisions and power structures that were in place maybe a century or more ago. And so Los Angeles, number one, has been dealing with this for over a century, this policy, and then this increased drive toward investment and like the interests of real estate and like profit interests that have designed the landscape of the built environment instead of designing it around what the actual needs of the environment and actually what would be a sensible and risk-appropriate way to build. So there is a long history of this. So what made this different, though, is that I think and why this is such an important case study and part of my research is these recent fires were like an X-ray that kind of exposed all these contradictions and all of these problems and overlapping crises, kind of the poly crisis, but even in the localized Los Angeles version, which is all coming up at once. Number one, because there's a housing crisis. So for the past many decades, Los Angeles has not built enough housing at all, again, because the interests of real estate and speculative real estate capital goes toward higher reward type projects. It's not had the right incentives because of all these other reasons. So specifically, there's been more development, even from 1990 to 2020. 45% of new homes built in California as a whole, as the state, have been built in what is called the Wildlife Urban Interface, the WI, the WUI. It's kind of a cute name, and a beautiful landscape that we'd all like to hike in and spend time in, and many people would like to live in, except it burns, right? So because so much new investment and new built environment has been built there, it has increased the risk already, even prior to anthropogenic climate change, which has created all these new kind of cycles that have lengthened the fire season, created different kind of fire seasons. There's a new term called hydroclimatic whiplash, which refers to 2 years of like a lot of rain, and so then lots of vegetation grows, and then one really dry year, it all turns into fuel that's ready to go. So these are some of the factors, just a few, that helped set up this crisis to be as bad as it was. And also is really relevant is in January, lots of zones burned that were not even burn zones. There were real surprises this time. So even though Los Angeles, it is known, and one other final thing, which is, because of the interests of capital, every time that houses burn, they've been rebuilt and even maybe expanded in that same area. So some of the houses that burned this time have burned in 1987, in 1970, in 2018. Like there's been the repeated cycles of destruction and rebuilding in areas where, again, capital wants it to be there, and this is what's tricky, communities want their community back. People want their home back. Some people, especially who have people who have a lot of resources may have all kinds of options of where to move. Some people don't, and because of the way that the insurance system works and the public policy works, some people, they need to rebuild where they are. If the policy had different incentives and different support for other types of choices that might exist, so the kind of rebuilding in the same risk zones starts to feel almost like a kind of a deja vu that, again, makes no sense, and especially is getting worse and worse.
So thank you for that, Sam. Nashin, I want to bring this back to you for a moment. So, each of you on this panel brings a unique perspective from digital mapping to cultural storytelling to urban systems. And I'm reminded of something you shared around what you called situational knowledge. And how people practice what you referred to as situated futuring on a daily basis. Now, how can futures thinking specifically help translate our kind of local and lived experiences into maybe more scalable approaches for resilient cities? And can you share an example of that from the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I think futures thinking can be transformative when we realize that those living on the front line of the challenges we're experiencing every day, they have had to come up with ways to improvise, and those are really creative things that we can learn with. And the question should be, how do we build infrastructures that allow those forms of care and solidarity to scale without flattening difference? And our approach has been an open source methodology so that we can really build to a very local context and share those strategies across the region without flattening the difference. And one example of the situated knowledge, it's knowledge of a place can only come from living there, and we need to have trust in that. And this is also an example of uncertainty. In Indonesia, it's a very disaster-prone country. There have been communities living on volcanoes for generations and generations, and there's so much we can learn from those communities who have learned to live with uncertainty. And so there's this particular example of a community in one of the most active volcanoes is called Mount Merapi. There's a community on the eastern slope called on the village of Delas, and the volcano actually has several slopes, and there are many communities, each with their own traditions and customs and beliefs. All of the other villages so there are these population of monkeys that live closer up to the volcanoes. All of the other villages shoot the monkeys because they're pests. They steal their crops, they're a nuisance. But the village of Delas has developed a relationship with the monkeys as a sort of risk reduction strategy. They feed the monkeys fruit because in the event of a volcanic eruption, the monkeys are always the first to know. And so when they need to run down the volcano, they choose to run down the eastern slope through the village of Delas. And so Delas is the first village to know. And then they've developed a ground-up radio system that alerts all of the other villages, as well as the emergency management agencies that are located further down the volcano. Today, at the base of the volcano, there's the most advanced seismographs to detect volcanic activity. But still, in recent years, the monkeys have always been the first to know. And so I think it's really important as we talk about technologies of sense-making to understand that there are these other technologies as well that are trusted and that are situational and that can come from living in a place, and it's about how do we scale those. And so we've incorporated those types of local ways of reading the environment and calibrating them into a system that now the government recognizes as something that they can corroborate against their official methods of reading volcanic alert levels.
Wow. So, Dr. Fu, I wanted to build on that a little bit. Now, you mentioned that design futures methods let us embed, I love the way you said this, imagination into infrastructure. And I'm fascinated by this idea that you said we can reframe lived experience as prototypes of possible futures. Can you share a little bit more about kind of what you mean by that?
Okay, so to help different stakeholders understand this, how we can prototype the future scenario. So we also use some new technology, we use the agent to develop tools. For example, we organize a future workshop. And so firstly, this May in Aizu, it's one of the small cities in Japan, North Japan. The city is become much smaller, and young people just leave the city and they go to Tokyo to find the job. So the local government, they just want to make some change. So we organize such a workshop, but this model is a future workshop, but we give them the agent tools because behind the agent, we just build a workflow. This workflow just based the design future process. We start from the signal. We build a library which collect a lot of those weak signal related with the technology. Social is perhaps the STEP, and then we try to collect the local challenges, either from the government official, from the NGO, and then we do the interpretation. So this part is we use our design future model. We use a speculative prototyping method, and then move to the next step is we need to give our stakeholders some image. We say it's like a future Skyping. Sometimes we know terminal headline and all those workflow just use the large language model. Each part we use different large LLM. At last, we can also generate some video. So it's very quickly to demonstrate the solution for those different background stakeholders. So we do another one in Singapore this October, and Just last weekend we do in the Milan. So it's a similar model. So we think because usually the algorithm is something like a black box we cannot understand, but we made like these tools use the workflow, but it's like seem transparent for the different stakeholders. So this just combine the future thinking inside this, we say is a complicated or wicked problem, and then we can help those different stakeholders to solve the problem. But I think this way is not try to find the solution, because the future thinking just help you foresight those different alternative futures, and then you can choose different solutions. Yeah.
I love that. I think there is something to be said about kind of expanding the problem area and understanding like what is the question that we're trying to design here as a jumping off point for exploration. Sam, I'd love to bring this question to you as well, but to maybe think more broadly about how LA is adopting or kind of learning about what building better next time can mean from other regions and other cultures?
Yes. I think that's a great question. I wish I wish LA had more. I think at least so far, I think what is important in looking at this example of this recent disaster is some lessons of what not to do, and lessons, again, of kind of like the X-ray of like looking at these different systems that were already in place, many inherited, like the built environment and this fire suppression, the preconditions, and then the additional kind of systems that have prevented better policies being put in place. And then I think especially right now, I think, what is interesting about Los Angeles, fire, certainly on the level of just like, as a new case study of like, firefighters from various parts of the world came also to help fight the fires, which I think was both an amazing thing and necessary, and very grateful for that. And at the same time, it was a knowledge sharing. So again, this is kind of between different bioregions, and like as the world changes and like certainly like the climatic realities become so important, that literally, a part of, in Portugal, in the mountains, outside Lisbon, which also had dramatic wildfires and has some climatic similarities to the LA, to the Southern California ecosystem, there's more things maybe that can be learned between those two regions than, say, like Los Angeles and like Sacramento even. There's differing spots in the world have a lot more to offer each other, and that's very exciting. But so that's on the kind of technical level of like disaster response and like the technologies of firefighting. In terms of policy, I think what is so sobering about the Los Angeles example is, again, compared to a lot of other places where policy sometimes leads investment and business decisions, as opposed to the American case, where it is often just downstream of these other financial interests that have always come first, and especially in relationship to real estate. And I think the other tricky thing that is maybe unique for Los Angeles and America compared to other regions in the world contending with their own climate risks right now, which is in America that, at least for the past half century, home ownership has been like the primary vehicle of wealth creation, right? And so it's a foundational part of the American dream and the middle class, and for people who really, and especially looking at, what is interesting about this recent fire is it cut across a lot of demographics in even a different way. I think the idea is that, wealthy celebrities with their mansions in Malibu or on the coast of Miami, they're the ones who are, gonna, like, we're subsidizing their risk that they have. That is true. In this case also, though, because of this expansion of the risk and expansion of the disaster hit, traditionally middle-class and working-class neighborhoods, especially a place like Altadena, which since the 1960s has been a historically African-American community and a, kind of solidly middle-class place, which again, home ownership, already there just is this tension between like what people actually need in their lives and what has built these communities, and then the interests of the, just the realities of the changing natural world, and where better policies could be, put in place. And I think some, certainly places which are urbanizing for the first time and maybe have better, at least can start out from some wiser strategic decisions around this. For Los Angeles, it's very complicated, but there are, again, solutions that are now being proposed and experimented with. Number one is reforming like the insurance system and also reforming like disaster relief, which in our country right now, there's so many obstacles to all of this, but especially being able to kind of support rebuilding in lower risk areas and just support more affordable housing in low risk areas. This is an essential thing, which I think is a universal across a lot of contexts. The other part, which is also related a bit to Nashin's research, is some of the traditional indigenous practices of the controlled burns there's been pilot programs in recent years across California. One really interesting piece about the LA fires is one of the houses that withstood the fires in Altadena was a house that had been given back to the Tongva tribe 2 years prior, first time in 200 years, and that they had done some controlled burns, they'd done other removal of invasive species, and that house stood. And so I think going back to, again, this situated knowledge, traditional knowledge, and indigenous communities who, is another incredible resource that's also, I think, across various bioregions that's a great lesson.
I think there's so much to be learned from the past as we think about the future. So we are, we're sitting as part of kind of Dubai Future Forum, and it kind of convenes these voices shaping like tomorrow's societies, right? So I kind of wanted to build off something, Nashin, that you had said at the top of this session, which was this idea that a resilient community is one that has learned how to pay attention together. And so I wonder kind of how might, platforms, kind of convenings like Dubai Future Forum help to move the conversation from anticipation towards action. Not just maybe kind of imagining better futures, but actually helping to drive us to kind of build cities better. So maybe I can open that question to you, and then I'd love to kind of hear from Dr. Fu as well.
Yeah, I think, well, first, I do think that it is important to have a space to protect a diversity and pluriversal futures. And one of my biggest fears is this homogenization of thought and like this, that we're marching towards a singular future that's implanted in our brains by Silicon Valley. And I think it's really important and powerful to move away from that, because when we lose that imagination of all of the possible futures we could be inheriting, then we really lose the capacity to survive. But I think one way of moving from anticipation to action is also really to pay attention to rebalancing the conversation and the interactions and the dialogue from geotechnology and geogovernance, because a lot of it is a governance issue as well. And how can we, in alliance here, build the democratic processes necessary to build a future together, because it is something we do together and not one group doing it for another.
Dr. Fu?
Yeah, I think this forum become a very important platform for us. So it's like we say it's a interdisciplinary platform. So people from different area, and so the best thing, because the second time I visited here, and the best thing I saw the exhibition not inside here, but in another hotel, which named Dubai Future Solution, and I really like the words is like prototyping. So because when I visited Carnegie Mellon University as a visiting scholar, the professor teach the information design just quote one word: "Don't talk to me, show me." So it's related with information visualization. So I think we saw so many like a prototyping, and we also see a lot of example here. So this is really inspires us. So I think the panel just share our thoughts, and we can also see those concrete like a prototype, those solutions. So that's why I organized some like exhibition which named the Futurescaping. So for 3 years, each year, so we just present some of our imagination about what the future society will be using technology like the mixed reality and maybe some interactive installation. So I saw a lot of similar things here. So I think that's really valuable for us. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think half the battle is kind of getting these ideas into the collective imagination so that we can interrogate whether it's something we want happening, right? Sam, I think, same question for you is like, how do we move from, what I think the purpose of a lot of futures practice is to provide provocation, but how do we move from provocation to planning?
Yeah. I mean, I want to hear everybody's answer for that who's here, and I think there's such a wealth of knowledge. I think that's part of it. I think sometimes when, there is no shortage of brilliant futures thinking, foresight work, projects, futures, and certainly speculative storytelling, art, imagination, I think we actually have a lot of that. And so it's where the rubber meets the road is about application and about kind of fighting up against these entrenched asymmetries of power. And I think that, political economy of the future and in this case of risk and of resilience and how these structures we already live within impact what kind of futures can be considered or can get traction. I think the main thing that in spaces like this, I think would be great to be able to draw not only on these kind of innovative ideas, innovative thinking, innovative imagination, but also the less sexy aspects of even financial futures, and by which I mean the kind of discounting of the future that is built into our financial system, and that that essentially $100 worth of destruction 100 years from now is worth only a couple pennies. And so there is such a fundamental framing of literally that our future is worthless, and that I think radically needs to change, and that a lot of the things we're discussing come up against that, and I look forward to so much more thinking, and I think there's some really interesting people proposing new policies and solutions and experimentation around that, really changing those incentives to be coherent with the world that as it changes, and also to literally to value the future that we claim to.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps there's a reframing of, what we mean by ROI, return on investment, right? And kind of how those values are embedded and analyzed. We have a few minutes, and so I thought I could open it up to our audience if there are any questions for our panelists, or even things you didn't agree with. We can have a very open conversation.
Hi, my name is Tracy. I'm a California native, and I live in a woo-wee right now. I really loved your example about the monkeys, and something that worries me with the acceleration of, climate change is that we don't change our relationship to these natural forces. There are people who have lived for many, many years in disaster areas who still stay on the mountain knowing that the volcano is going to erupt. And I think that there's something to also learn from that, this doesn't always have to be about controlling or mitigation. I think it's also an opportunity for us to change our relationship with the natural environment and treat it as a sacred relationship. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you're also seeing, in your work for what can we learn from the people who live on the side of the volcano and they're not going anywhere knowing that that volcano is going to erupt?
I think there's a lot to learn from that, because the fact that they choose to live there is because the volcano is not only an erupting force, it's a life-giving force. It's fertile soil, it's incredibly beneficial for growing crops, and so it's this recognition that the climate is a volatile living landscape and an acceptance of that rather than an attempt to control that. And I think the project of modernity or colonization, besides controlling that, it was also a project of stripping away attention of our mind and body and the environment. And I really think that we need ways to redirect that attention back towards what we're part of. I mean, we're seeing all over the world, even the challenges in governance, let's say, is a result of this atomization that's driven by these, it's very like individualistic, and it's this cutting off of relation. Whereas I think we need to relearn that, and that's why I think resilience is a practice of paying attention together, because that is relational. It is paying attention to you and to the environment that I am part of, but also because this is so volatile, paying attention to it at the scale of a city and a region. And how do we do that at scale? We can use technologies to that, but it really comes to sense making through an alliance of tools, the monkeys, our own senses and technologies.
I think I saw a question over there. I don't know. Yeah.
I was a volunteer at the Bethesda Community Rural Development Office that dealt with the 500,000 people who lived on the side of Mount Merapi. And my sense was that they were desperately poor. This is 40 years ago. Things could have changed. They could only eat cassava. They couldn't afford rice. And that the real issue is about economics, that there was no place. The people lived on the volcano because there was no place for them to live anywhere else. And I'm just curious about that aspect of resilience, that in fact it's about equity, it's about giving people alternative opportunities, creating new spaces for them, especially when they have to live in highly vulnerable and hazardous areas. I don't mean to discount what you've said. I was just bringing an old perspective. Maybe it's out of date.
No, I think that's it. Thank you for bringing that up. I didn't mean to discount that perspective. It is an important one. I mean, even communities living along the river sides now, it's because they have been pushed there, not because they chose that necessarily. But for the volcano example, there's also in Indonesia and in Merapi especially, there's a deep spiritual relationship with the volcano. So it's also this idea of relationship that the volcano is an ancestor and ancestors go there, and the reaction of the volcano is a sign of imbalance. And so I think it is a complex mix of several factors. Definitely there is one about people maybe have not necessarily initially chosen to live there, but they did choose to stay there to some extent. At least we started our work there in 2018 in Merapi, and this is what they shared with us, is that there was this deep tie to the ancestry of the volcano, and they definitely felt a lot of the economic inequalities, and they definitely felt a lot of the injustice that there weren't systems in place to support them, not just economically, but in the face of disasters, which is why this act of developing this ground-up method of how do we make sense of this together now that the volcano is active again, it had to come from themselves. And unfortunately, a lot of innovation or community adaptation practices come as a result of just having to live in that condition.
Hi there, my name is Donna DuPont, and I practice foresight at the intersection of climate change and security, civil security, and health. And so a lot of my work is looking at it at the global level, but looking at patterns, systemic patterns, and diagnosing turbulence and disruption, and then potential for conflict. And so when I think about the future of communities, I'm very concerned from a climate change and security perspective, especially where we're talking about already existing vulnerabilities, fragility, and then you have the climate change amplifier on top of that. And I don't see urgency for action to really stabilize communities, support local level resilience building in order to be able to cope with the increasing challenges. And so I have a question, because in my spaces I'm always highlighting these challenges and saying, okay, we need to take action, we need to do something, because inaction is a choice, but there's a lot of consequences to communities, and I would love to be more proactive. So do you have any suggestions on how we can kind of start to reframe messaging to those that are in decision-making positions to start to think proactively in this space?
I mean, 100%. Like, it is. I mean, and this is, I think we have all the puns from living through this in LA, and all the gallows humor of like, it's a 5-alarm fire. Like, literally, it is. Like, and I think what is fascinating, and I guess disillusioning a bit, is that in the moment when this was all happening and living in LA, and maybe some of you were there or have friends and family who were also impacted, and many people in my family lost their houses. Nobody lost their lives, but lots of, 400 people did. So it's absolute tragedy. And in that moment, and there was, as always, another thing, that it revealed the inequalities, dramatically, and that's such a big factor, as you just spoke to. But the thing I would say is there was a brief moment where it felt like everybody was like, oh my God, this is the wake-up call. It's all gonna change. Like, now we know it's real. And whether you're the movie exec in Malibu or the school teacher in Altadena, like everybody, and then time passed, and then Governor Newsom is like, let's fast track all the rebuild. It's a Marshall Plan just for rebuilding, but not necessarily changing all these other systems. I mean, there's much more we could go into about the failures of these other systems. And I guess just something we were speaking about earlier, like one would think that, this is a wake-up call to suddenly maybe redirect a lot of resources to resiliency for the city, eliminating some of the fragility for the city, balancing some things for the city, instead of having an Olympics that is also, number one, creating like a false time clock for some rebuilding, and is being mismanaged on every possible level and full of corruption, and is only going to benefit like some wealthy developers. And so one would think that there should be, and there is I respect very much an amazing, grassroots movement toward no Olympics and connecting that to this bigger crisis, and that there should be better uses for all of our city monies. And it's still happening, right? So I think I am with you on all of that. And I think some of this has to do with political movements as a solution, not just relying on the really, really brilliant insights from the work of many of us here, which is important. It is necessary, but not sufficient, right? The necessary part is also about different types of like mobilizing political movements and communities to fight. And sometimes the Goliath is too big, so the Olympics is a behemoth that's going ahead in a city in 3 years, and it is absolutely ludicrous that that's happening. So that's a case in point of what should be redirected resources.
I'll add something very quickly. I think that because I feel this very resonant, and I think the thing to bring to decision makers is, let's not, instead of funding consultants, which is where a lot of the money goes, why don't we fund the thing, because there are things that are working on the ground. It's just that often people doing the work don't have the megaphone to keep talking about it because we're busy doing the work. And so I think it's to find those and to fund those instead of consultants, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all to our panel and to the audience. And yeah, have a great afternoon.